Holger, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for being with me. What do people know you for?
Oh, depends on which people you ask, I guess.
You know lots of kinds of people.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't?
Well, you might be a bit more like scattering than...
Yeah. Sometimes I maybe have a bit of a wild running empathy or so, that I empathize with a lot of people and situations around me. That also tends to bring me more in connections and so on.
Right.
But it doesn't always feel free or so. It's like, it's not like I always have this choice to be in empathy with something or not. But what am I known for? If you ask my son, then I'm known to be his father. In some sense, Papa.
Mm-hmm.
And of course his perspective matters a lot to me.
Yeah.
Also in the last decade that always influenced a lot of my relations, basically. Of course I was preferring to go somewhere where I can go with him, so take him with me. There still is some separation, that there are some things that we don't do together or so, but that's one. And there's like this whole programming world things that I'm, not really world, but all these programming activities that are now very, used to be different like 20 years ago, 25 years ago than it is now. So I'm known for some projects and have been kind of famous or popular in some communities and so on.
And you've been in the world, you've been in that world during that time when it was different?
On and off since 30 years.
Wow.
Or even more. Like, also for some years I've done other things and was rather distant to programming and digital kind of things.
Yeah.
But it is a line running through my line from my youth till now. But still I would say it's not the only story, basically.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of the different stories that you're sort of inhabiting. You really...
I also try to do this, yes.
Yeah. Over the course of your life, yeah. I feel like you're really serious about table tennis also.
I mean, actually, luckily not as serious as I used to be when I played tournaments in my youth and so on. Like right now it's just a very funny, lots of migrants, table tennis community here down the street, basically.
Right.
And it's actually, I'm going there to play table tennis, chat with some people, and it's also can just go there and leave at any time, basically. That's what everybody does.
Yeah.
But if the weather is good and it's not too windy, then you will find some people there. It's a random collection.
Is it about connecting with people for you to hang around?
It's also hanging out, and sometimes I want to talk, sometimes not, but that's all fine. It's a bit also what I perceive as hackerspace culture.
Oh yeah.
Which I'm engulfed also since a long time, where it is interesting that it's usually places where people can come in and they don't even talk much, and they just sit in one corner and they put up their laptop and do some things, and it's kind of, in many places that's kind of accepted. Like, we don't have to go around and talk with everybody. And I kind of like that you can kind of have like a gradual how much you actually interact and how much you just use the space. Maybe you are fine that some people are doing something somewhere, but you don't even want to get involved. So these kinds of places and gatherings are also what I try to create myself.
Yeah, you've talked about this before in relation to like parks, for example, where it's just like an open space and you don't need to have permission to go in, and you don't have to like define things. You can just kind of use the space as you wish. And like, why is this important to you?
It creates more diverse situations, like in this place where also there's this table tennis, there's also some people who are like between, let's say, 60 and 80, and they bring some tables and they bring some picnic, and then they basically also sit around there like 5-8 meters away from the table tennis happenings, and they do their thing there. and some other things do some slackline things and so on, and
Yeah.
yet others maybe meet to play like a huge round of rondo, like table tennis going around. And then there's the tango people. They bring their music and then lots of tango, and these are all different. And then there's bull people who like throw bull and so on. And there's the cafe, and there's the cinema that is also there, and so on. So it's all like, it's more like an ecology. And these places, this usually, like the diversity of that is usually if you have a nice space, like a garden or a park, and it's kind of permission free to go there. You don't need to buy things all the time.
Right.
Once you're there, you need to order something or so. That's, of course, a different experience.
I think like maybe, I don't know, culture or society will resist this kind of thing because it's a bit unpredictable what will happen, and people are afraid of this.
And you have to arrange yourself with others.
Right.
You cannot have like a reserved right to do something. If somebody else gets in your way, and you have to find a way to deal with each other.
Yeah, this is something that's surprisingly I don't know if I would say uncommon, but it's like, we want to know that we have certainty about things, and like borders and edges, and like I know that I've paid for the space and this is property and I own this, and like everything.
And this is now my time slot. You have to go.
Yeah.
I put it up in this plan 1 week ago.
Yeah. Do you have any speculations to where this comes from?
Yes, I have speculations. This kind of logistical planning of like in time and space, drawing lines, like you have calendaring, and you have like, this is the space, and maybe there's a set of rules around it.
Yeah.
And you, for example, a very common thing is that you work with calendar and clock time. So basically you have slots, maybe 1 hour slots, and if like many people try to get there, now in Corona it's all a bit different, but then you maybe have quite strict limits, like you say, you can be there from 6 to 8, but then somebody else comes in, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
But it's like, I also know quite a number of places that have like, they do some of this, but they also say, okay, it's the evening,
Yeah.
and you have to care for some things yourself, and you also maybe have to take care at some point about the neighbors, because they might complain. So there's no guarantee. You also have to handle it yourself, right? And if you are interested that the whole thing keeps existing, then you try to find ways, and don't just say, oh no, I can do whatever I want, and I reserved the space.
Demands a kind of attention to your surroundings, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it's a common practice in many spaces. Like if you have some kind of experience with any kind of collective space, like a squad, or some longer running protest, or any kind of self-organizational things, Friday for Futures, whatever. I mean, there's many things that actually get you the experience of, you go somewhere and you see, okay, how do things get done here, and then you embed yourself in doing this. And actually, once you've done this a couple of times, it's often very easy.
Yeah, I feel like I'm trying to describe this pressure against these kinds of spaces where we see this in, like, for example, Latin America or in the Caribbean. We're like, oh, that's like Caribbean time, they're late by an hour, and we sort of laugh at this or look down or whatever. We as, I don't know who we is right now, but this exists, right? Like this sort of looking down on this, and it's actually, the way you described it's quite beautiful actually. It's like you have to be conscious of what's around, and you need to be flexible and take things into account. It's more involving, I guess. Right.
And yes, and it requires like a situational empathy or so, that it's not based on some form of property, like this is now, you have to leave and so on. And I think, I don't know, it's actually quite an important is a bad word for that. It's a very fundamental kind of thing, like our practices around common spaces. Like there's the private space, especially like in the Western world, there's a focus on this. You have this private space, and then there's the common spaces, like the rooms that are shared by the house project, or something like this. Or like in the more kind of normal sense or so, like the public parks and so on, right? And then we have all the streets full of cars, and they are also public spaces, but they have been reserved for cars. Like 80% of our public space is reserved for these big machines that that need to sit somewhere, so that somebody has the right at any time to go there and drive on. You know, and it's a big machine that has this reserved. And we have these reservations. We have like reserved things, and it's funny also if you go to these places like saunas and so on, that you have maybe 100 chairs and things to lie down on and so on, and half of them, or even more, are occupied by a towel, which serves as a reservation signal. This person is currently somewhere else, but it wants to know for sure, you know, that when the person comes back, that it will have this space. So, but then it's very funny because you look around and you see, I think it's more than 50%. It's like 70% is empty, but with a towel on it. You know, and suddenly there's a shortage. There is not actually a shortage, but this reservation scheme basically makes it very...
So when I asked you about where you think these edges come from, and you sort of related it immediately to clock time, is it only about that, or are there other things also? Or?
It's a very dominant technique that is used in large, you know, in all kinds of circles. Not just capitalist, but also anti-capitalist circles and so on. They all kind of, many of them agree on you need to make efficient use of your time, and the way how you do this is you have like a plan. Like you have like dates and meetings and times and clock times, and the more you actually plan in the future, the more intense your life is. You know, that's kind of like a promise, and the more you get done. You know, just because you have a lot of time slots allocated, that it's like the promise of it. Now we all know it doesn't really quite work like that, right?
Right.
It's like in the end. There might be like huge fragmentation, and you're trying for a long time to get something done, but you don't really get to it because you have so many other things ongoing and so on. Or you just can't get yourself to be motivated enough.
Yeah, I heard this metaphor of like a life being sliced into a pie, and like the thinner the slices are, the more slices you have, the sort of the harder just to perceive what's going on, or the faster it feels like time is passing, and you don't even have an awareness of what's happening.
Yeah. For example, I'm in the camp of people thinking quite critically about the dominance or the predominance, basically, of action.
Action.
Yeah. Action.
Activity.
We all agree we need to act, and often we all agree we need to act urgently. You know, that's like the dominant mode. Like everything needs to happen urgently. And we need to act. So inaction and not doing something is like frowned upon in all kinds of circles. No, we need to be active. Like
sitting around doing nothing.
Yes. Well, apparently nothing. I mean, the question is, you know, if all this busyness and productivity and like urgency that is ruling us, you know, that we engage with, what is this actually producing? What kind of world? What kind of, not really world, worlds don't exist really. I mean, a world doesn't exist. It's my series of experience, my interactions, my feelings around things, my little things I conspire with others to actually go for, and so on. This creates new situations and like new, I like to think about situations a lot. Like situationists is also like from the 1960s, this Guy Debord, the spectacle and so on, that has been ongoing since 50 years now in various scenes like artists and so on. And it's a very interesting text, certainly. You know, the society of the spectacle. Like we are ruled by like flowing images now with YouTube and all these things. You have this even like much more in your face, basically. And
you mean to say this is about showing or signaling or performing something? And
yeah, it's performing. It's like producing
or
images of ourselves, quite literally, with others. Refining these images. I mean, editing your profile, your avatars, your websites, and so on and so on. And it's a flow of images, and we get things like certain scenes from like a war somewhere, you know, or some kind of decision that is taken maybe in the rainforest, and you get images from various of these places, and they have The situation is basically, I think, looked at this a bit more than just like images in the sense of photos. That's like one thing, of course, but it's also what we imagine in our minds, like our imaginations, like what flows.
Our conceptions of ourselves.
Yes, conceptions of ourselves and what's going on around me. And basically situations, maybe to cut this a bit shorter, a situation is ecologically complex. I mean, there's always many things that flow in and you cannot fully determine it. Like into any situation, even like the situation we are in now, there's various factors flowing in, including some rain that hits this construct that had an accident earlier this morning, you know. So basically, when you really look at the boundaries of situations, there's always complexity leaking in, like other things happening. There's some people sitting, you know, a few meters away from here, they're doing some things, and there's some children playing down there. I think earlier on they did like a birthday party and so on. There's plants who are like struggling in this little bit of an artificial things, you know. So it's a lot of it's just this situation, but it's certainly not just us talking, but also the situation talking, like the overall. And this situation is something kind of wonderful in the sense of it's very rich, you know.
Yeah, this is generally what I like about, I don't know, just like conversing with you, because I feel like you're always trying to find the edges of these things and sort of make it visible or legible, and it causes me to question. Like this you were talking about urgency, and reminded me of that last time we were walking, and we just did this exercise of like, let's deliberately try to remove urgency from every moment, and we're not going to rush, and we're not going to like finish crossing the road quickly because the cars are coming. Like we can take our, like this thing about just breaking the patterns just so we can see the edges of where we are is, I think, just fun and kind of fascinating. And yeah, like how do you like, what brings your attention there? How do you even know that exists, and what kind of
I'm surrounded, as far as urgency is concerned, I have it very much in me still, even though I remind myself to try to get rid of it as much as I can, you know.
It's a product of living in this environment, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. It's something, and also sometimes I produce urgency myself. Like it's not something that only happens to me, or so I'm also kind of part in the reproduction of urgencies all around us and so on. And I heard a very beautiful kind of lecture, so a half an hour talk from someone who talked about the wisdom of the stone, you know,
like basically a stone.
Yeah, a stone. Basically, the thing is this question of inaction, you know, that we value action so much, and it stuck with me and kind of reappeared as a topic. That acting seems to be always like, no matter what you do, but you need to act, you know. And somehow all these acts and all these actions, they produce a certain kind of busyness, and it also means a lot of movements because you need to act and then do things and so on. And this is kind of embedded into the whole planet-wide machinery of global heating, you know, of
global warming.
Global warming, yes. Right. So that's also kind of like we are so busy that we are heating up the planet on the whole scale. And I do like some busyness myself sometimes. I like to be busy, like I have this thing I want to do today, and then I'm like, you know, entering this, but more trying to get into some kind of flow. But of course also there's many tedious things. Sometimes I need to do some things that, you know, not only cleaning the dishes, but bureaucracy or many other things that basically are not directly like enjoyable or so as per se. But as part of something else I want to do, I kind of endure it and go with it, right? Sometimes I even like it. Like, sometimes bureaucracy is very funny. At least if you are in the position, and not everybody is, obviously. Like if you go to the foreigners office and you try to apply for a visum or so, then of course it might not be so funny, right? Let's say. But I mean, we have this massive bureaucracy, and that includes software mediated worlds, like YouTube is a massive bureaucracy, Google is a massive bureaucracy, the whole Amazon thing. It's like, it's in some sense shiny and everything, but it's actually like a huge bureaucratic machine with procedures, and you need to prove that it's you, and you need to have proper payment, and it is like, and you need to declare this maybe to the state, and once you start offering something and so on, and then like you are touching these bureaucracies everywhere. You have policies from YouTube, what they allow or not, or so I think one of the not much discussed aspects of this whole digitalization is
of what?
Of this digitalization, things like many things went towards mobiles and computers and computer mediated social transactions and so on and so on. That this is kind of producing a very bureaucratized way of living. Like you're filling out forms, you're finding matches maybe with people on a dating platform and so on, and it sells this as something very enjoyable, but it's at the same time also kind of a sign of a kind of a breakdown, that we are landing at this thing that you kind of, that is the convenient and the most likely successful way for many people to go via these platforms. Kind of, it's already like what happens if you have like a social breakdown, and then I don't want to be too negative about digitalization, but I think there's.
But is this different from like the normal kind of like, things used to be better in the old days, and now there's all this like new stuff, and it's not like is it the same? Is what you're saying any different from this kind of?
Yes, I'm also endorsing internet things and so on.
Well, of course,
not of course, really, because I think the overall we don't really know. Like the internet has a lot of interesting.
But we don't know how it's impacting us really. We're it takes us like a long time to really understand the.
Yeah, we are, I think, beginning to understand some things maybe about what happens with internet and so on. And it's also very contextual. One of the big problems I see, especially in the IT world, like in programming and so on, is that we are too much in a practice of thinking that we can talk about the world. It's not only programmers. Like everybody very easily talks about or claims things about human nature. Like what is the nature of humans? Or what is like, the story of the world, and so on and so on. And it's some kind of colonial thing, like that I put myself in a position to even, to say something about everything. So I like to basically try to be context aware. Context aware because of my own context and also of my limited insights. Like I know some things about Ukraine, I've been there, I know some people I can talk with, and I do, and I also know some people from Russia and so on. So I have some insights in certain things that are ongoing in various, but it's like my contextualization realization or something like this. I don't think that that's why I know what's going on in the world. It's often this kind of feeling of yourself that you would really know what's going on in the world. You talk about China or you talk about this and so on. I think it's not as useful as it sounds grand. I can make some general claims about China, and maybe I've studied some things, I've listened to some things, maybe I read a book about it and so on.
Right.
But come on. China is like, I know from any country I've visited that if you look closer, then things become much more complex than anything that you could express on the national level. You can say things about Brazil, right? But there's also so many things that are in certain areas of Brazil that are in some sense much more complex. I'm kind of a fan of Timothy Morton's take on this, the ecological thought and hyper objects and so on, where he basically questions the traditional view that the sum is somehow more than, like, no, the whole is more than the sum of its parts,
yeah.
right? And he actually basically plays a lot, and very, like, I also use this, actually the whole is smaller than its parts. Like, each part is actually more complex than the whole. You know? And that's kind of like goes a bit against how we traditionally think about it. But if you think about human, like how we know each other, right? Or how you know maybe someone that you know for 10 years. There's a certain kind of complexity in many ways on how you interact with this person. And also if you know about their past, you know, maybe your past and the past of that other person that you know for a long while has intersected at various points, you know. And it has a certain complexity. If you then also take the whole set of your friends that you know, including all the musicians and, you know, many people and people in programming space, it's already quite complex. Like, what is happening in this round of people, basically, in their various places. And it's in some sense a more lived complexity than anything you could say about Brazil as a whole. Right? You can say things. You can say things about the president also. But that doesn't reflect the actual complexity going on in the rainforest and so on. It's like...
So your reflex is to always try to see more context, try to
become aware of my own contextualizations, and, you know, and not try to get away from the practice of talking about the world or nature.
Yeah.
These like super high abstractions that I think are kind of part of a ruling language. They're kind of like an inheritance of colonialism.
Yeah, I think it implies a kind of standing on top of things, that you can see
exactly,
things.
Exactly. So you're sitting there having a nice drink, talking about everything.
Your kingdom.
Yeah, it's like playing the game of kings or something like
Right.
this. Right. And it's like, you will also find me that I make certain statements that sound like global or all-encompassing and so on. But I found it's quite interesting to really avoid talking about the world or the society. And so on. And I think the more people do it, the more kind of we get into some kind of ecological understanding of all of the different influences and interactions, frictions.
I would love for you to talk a little bit more about your collective living experiences, because this is, I think, a good example of like ecological thinking, because it's lived every day, right, with these people that are around you. And you had this project where, I think for like 10 years or over 10 years, you were like the co-founder of this co-living space,
co-living,
house,
it's a
land,
collectively owned thing. So we had a long 2-year negotiation phase with the city, which was very much initially against us. And that means the administration and the kind of city parliament and the media. So it was quite a thing that we, you know, over
This
time.
is before you started.
Right, this was like 2 or 3 years before.
Right.
We had an advantage in that we had already organized a lot of things collectively together before in the kind of a university context, you know, it's called AStA in Germany, so you work together there. And many people from this group, and we also organized a strike, like a university-wide strike and so on, that lasted a couple of months, right? So we had like something which kind of put our whole university of 4,000 or 5,000 people into a state of exception for like 2 or 3 months, with like 1,000 people sleeping in the university and so on.
Nice.
And this experience was very, it kind of, even though in some senses it failed, you know, in some senses, it was still a lasting memory for many people. And
You're talking about the strike, or
the strike, you know. And then this housing opportunity, we sneaked in like through some coincidence in a large house, like 5 stories and so on, in 1 floor. And many of us, like the core group, was actually also involved in this huge scale strike. So we basically had a lot of joint political collective action, you know, negotiation, all kinds of experiences, and that the city had no idea of. So they were all against us, but they didn't actually understand,
what they
our
were up against. Wow. What a rare situation. All right.
So that was our advantage.
Yeah.
And we kind of talked with all of the also conservative people in the parliament and so on. And yeah, it's a longer story. And after 2 years or so, it was like one of a core group of like 5 people with like 30, 40, 50 people in the house, also like involved in various ways. And over 2 years.
I know you said it's a long story, but would you be able to say in a sentence, like, is it because of power or leverage, or because you made some good arguments to them, or like what?
We had a very creative way to go about pragmatically getting to the point where we have the whole area,
On your side.
That was basically, we were kind of like, our goal was, okay, we're going to own this somehow, We find a construct and...
But this is about like talking to the local people there, the neighbors, or...
Yeah, neighbors, everybody.
Okay.
We talked with everybody. It was a huge talking thing.
Yeah.
Like, was also some ways of sabotage was involved. Like they tried to do a, that's a bit harder to talk about in detail, but and many things basically. But the power of people who are motivated and have capacity and experiences. Like even if you just have 5 people sometimes, and then a larger supporting group, but these 5 people put it to themselves to say, okay, we really want to try this. So it's clear it takes a while. You cannot do this in a day or so. It's like you have to engage with this for a year or maybe 2. But then actually you can do a lot. Like 5 people can today, if they really are very motivated to do something together, they can really move a lot of things, right? There's always this idea that you need to have thousands of people, but it's not true. I think 5 is wonderful. Like,
Everybody knows 5 people.
Yeah, but
maybe not that
do
they
you
can
get
work with
yourself into a situation with 5 people where you can develop these kinds of joint desires, right? That's a question. That's a completely different question. The usual question is that it's usually asked in all kinds of let's organize ourselves is how do we become as popular as possible? Like how can we become as many as possible? Because there's the belief in numbers. The more we are, the more we are going to move. But this is very tricky. The game of popularity, in order to get some power, is like a parliamentary game. It's something that is played in many ways. In terms of like voting, you get like a majority for something and so on. But I think effectively, if you're doing any kind of project, and maybe you're in some kind of conflict because you first you claim some space and you want to make it work, right? Then 5 people who like each other,
Oh, they have to like each other?
Not in the sense of they shouldn't hate each other. Yeah. You don't need to be like super friends with everybody. That's not the point. The point is, do you really kind of enjoy participation? Like you have some conflict, but overall you like doing this together. That's like a wonderful base, And that doesn't mean that others are excluded, but it means you get a certain kind of base drive together. And that is very attractive also for other people. If you come to a group and you have a feeling like, oh, there's a couple of people and actually they have a very good way of talking and doing things, you feel much more inclined to actually say, I'm going to help a bit. If it's like a complete crisis mode and the main topic of the meeting is, damn, we are too few, we need to be more, and you're kind of like careful because...
So synergy is contagious.
Yeah, and actually even if you're like 2 people or 3 people and you kind of arrange some things and so it can become attractive for others to also join this kind of way. And I think it's more about arranging what we want to do together. That's more like this wanting and like the kind of how we like doing things together.
Yeah.
That's more important than it's not a matter of principles and that everybody agrees on rules on how things and the time slots when we meet and we need to commit for exactly these time slots in the next 5 weeks. This is dangerous path. I don't say, some people do it and it's just that I try to do it differently. And I'm kind of like rare to commit to clock times. I kind of try to avoid it. It's very worthwhile to think about more indirect ways of arranging what we want to do together. So one example, in Tarnac, which is an interesting community in the Central Massif in France, they have, now I haven't been there in the Corona time so far, so I'm talking about pre-Corona. They have a lunch place. They have like a bar that is open every day, right? It's basically a village of 200 people, 250 people. They have a bar and the magasin next to it, where you can buy some stuff. And in the bar there is lunch at lunchtime, right? And the food is usually very good. So there's many people coming from the various kind of autonomous projects, and they come together during lunchtime, and more or less every day. Like, and sometimes you might feel like just having your lunch and leaving.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you meet someone and you talk about what's going on and so on. So it's an informal setting, you know. And sometimes you keep on going, and sometimes you also make an appointment and say, oh, you know what? We wanted to talk about the organization of this street festival. Why not? Why don't we have lunch together tomorrow, and then we can, you know, chat about it. You know? So you have kind of like a bit like this table tennis thing. You know, just a place where you can basically it's there.
It's always there, or you know it's going to be there. And
yes, and you can also just go there to enjoy it. Like, it's not about work or not work or something like this, you know. So basically you have always this kind of how much you want to turn this into something where you discuss, you know, some actions that you promise, or if you're just there to, you know, hang out, have some good food, and maybe hear some jokes, whatever, you know. It's I think it's a good ground or a good situation actually for arranging what we want to do together. And it's a bit informal, of course, so you cannot really, it's not a formal process, obviously. But if you do something like this, it will have an effect on how you collectively do things. And maybe it will make your assemblies like differently focused, because you have already have some details and you really just have the one remaining question that you wanted to settle, and that's it, right? Because you don't try to put everything into meetings. Like, the more you put up in the meeting and the more you try to negotiate at the meeting, you know, the more it is also kind of tiresome for everybody, you know.
Yeah. You described it as broadcasting also. This like people. It's not so much this kind of what we consider to be a group of people talking in a very horizontal structure. It's sort of like everyone has their chance to put their thing on the agenda, and then they get to speak about that, and everybody must listen, and then maybe there's some feedback mechanism, whatever. But it's essentially, you consider this to be a broadcasting or sort of one
it's a
way.
broadcast that is basically kind of promising that you can get rid of the fear of exclusion. So because you have this process, and it's you know, it's also somewhat true. I mean, if you have like a process where you say, okay, we get together, we have a certain set of practices how we do this. Nobody talks too long and blah blah blah. Then yes, it can actually allow somebody who might not have as many social relations to actually bring in something that would otherwise, in this informal setting that I'm describing, may be harder. That's the theory. In practice, that doesn't really often play out. Like, it's very hard, actually. So usually, if somebody has a problem because he or she doesn't like to be in the same room as somebody else who's also in the room, right? Then it's usually easier to first talk with somebody on the side. You know, basically you have a side conversation. You say, I'm really unhappy about how this went, and so on and so on. And then maybe, you know, if you find a person you can trust in this sense and so on, and they actually also start thinking about this and so on, then something can evolve from there. So I think there is a way to actually also go about this exclusion problem, that somebody might feel excluded and so on, in different ways. And actually the track record of assemblies, and I mean, there's so many people, if the assembly starts having 10 or 20 people, there are always people who don't really like to speak in such settings. They don't really can have because you are broadcasting, you know. And there is like you say something, and then somebody else, like while you're talking, raises their hand and indicates they want to respond or something like this, right? So it's a very different situation. And I think the fluid way, the informal way, like if we start talking about something, saw this happening a lot, actually. And other people are interested and they have the opportunity to join, right? They can do it. And if we at some point feel actually we also wanted to talk about something that is something else than what we're currently doing, we might even leave the situation and the discussion goes on because, you know. And I think this possibility to leave a conversation and to join it, that's very good to arrange situations where this is possible. And there's like formalized things like bar camps and other things where you know you have this as a formal model basically, but I think it's really also for any kind of collective endeavors, anything you want to do together. It's good to have this mode of actually doing something. So for example, we had 4 weeks in the initial times, we had 4 weeks of building something in the project together. So there was guaranteed food at lunch at this housing project. And we ceased to have the necessity for plenaries. It was very rare, basically, because we just could discuss everything and everybody was happy, basically.
But I was just about to ask this in the sense that it seems quite functional to have this space that's available every day and people come there to do something that's important to them, which is to eat or even necessary for them to do, and they can interact with people that are part of their context and whatever. And do you think it would be functional to just have, to not have the formal structure at all? Like you were saying, in this short period of 4 weeks, like it was sort of not necessary. Would you consider doing a kind of co-living setup where actually this was kind of the structure?
It's really just about, not about plenaries are evil, or no, they are good, they're the most important thing that we have, and so on. But it's rather about, you know, maybe constraining them, not seeing them as the fundamental structure for everything, but allowing also other ways how things can happen. Assemblies are, however they are done, always having an exclusion boundary, and you cannot define it away because, you know, I know this, like we had some in this first construction phase of the collective project. We had there was one guy who was working at very dear friend, became a very dear friend. He was working at in construction works like big houses and so on since he was 16. So he didn't go to university or make like a higher degree. He basically worked on like huge construction sites for a very long time and so on. And he found it very funny how in our project, when there was a question of like how do we now make this new path into the forest, like how do we build this new path into the forest, he kind of recognized, okay, but you first need to talk about it and you need to have a plenary about it, you know. I cannot talk to anybody and discuss it because you first need to have a plenary about it. So he also needed to come to the plenary because he had all the expert knowledge. He could basically say, you know, what are the options and, you know, how much effort it is to do it this way, how much effort it is to do it this way, and so on. So he had to interact, and he could do it, like he could interact with his plenary, but also through his eyes, I also kind of already saw, it is a bit weird, you know, all these mostly academically oriented people, mostly from a leftist context and so on, they don't feel we don't really have distributed agency. It all roots down to the plenary, right? And because it is a bit inhuman, like you ask me, like I'm part of this, you know, and you ask me something and I say, well, then you need to come to the plenary and we have it every Tuesday at 8 o'clock. You know, I'm sorry, I cannot really, just you need to come to, so it's basically some
Which means you don't have agency.
Yes. So, and so it is in some form also alienating. It's also like there's a process and so on, but it's also replicating state structure. The state also promises we have procedures for everything, you know? And I'm kind of a fan of trying to find distributed agencies so that it's based on some kind of general cooperation or so, you know. But at the same time, you can also take some form of, I think that could work. Maybe we need to talk to this person because, you know, she's also sometimes doing something on Thursday evening. But I think if you want to do it tomorrow, you can do it. You know, I think this should work, but better talk to this person still, you know. And if I have a sense of the situation, then if you do this, then, and you can basically say, oh, I talked to this and that person, you know, and that is posted to a channel where other people see it, or maybe they have an injection or so, but you wouldn't actually put it up for a vote. You would just say, you know, or maybe I would say, I talked, and we also clarified with this person, so, you know. And I like these kind of two people can already have agency thing, you know. They don't need to involve the whole group, discuss everything, and so on. Right. And of course, there's problems. We too might decide, or we might go for something that others actually complain about. So it's a living process, you know. We are not out to actually, I mean, you know, it's a matter of intention. If I'm actually out to make a secret deal with you, so that we can get something through, because right now this other person is on holiday, so if we suggest it now, we can get it through or something like this. Okay, but then there's a problem with this intention, you know. And it's more interesting to actually get rid of these kinds of, or to kind of counter these intentions, because they are ultimately toxic. You know, if you just so when I'm saying situation, it's not about manipulation. It's about knowing. Like when we talked yesterday about a particular technical, and you had a suggestion, like, oh, maybe it could be done this way and so on. We said, yeah, probably, but it might be that this person has something against it. So I think if you talk with this person and you can get the person to agree, then go for it. Right? So I kind of like, I take some agency, but I also give you some agency, and you know that you only need this final person to talk with. And if that person agrees, then you're basically good. Very unlikely that anybody else comes and say, no.
I wanted to pick up on something you mentioned earlier about being free to just leave the conversation at any time, and maybe without getting too like into technology specifically, you do happen to work on this like chat app that's about conversations, and I just find it interesting that there's always this notion of like forever in computing, or like you join a group and then you're sort of in the group forever. Like you really have to, it's a big process to realize when you can leave something, and it's often seen as kind of political or like sort of dramatic, or have you seen any sort of functional patterns in the technology world around this social paradigm of like leaving spaces, which goes against the default of like, you know, forever
or completely gone? I mean, there is an illusion of presence. I think that, I mean, just because I'm part of a group, you don't know what my settings are. Maybe I've disabled the notifications, maybe I've archived the chat. Like with the recent version of our chat app, for example, if you archive a chat and you have muted it, it remains very much below your radar. You don't get notifications about it. You can go to it, you know, but you're basically saying, I put it on the side. And that's not really distinguishable. And also, if you message a group, you don't really know who's really currently reading, you know. They might be on various forms of travel, and so anyway, there's this illusion of presence to start with, right? I see many people, not just with this chat app that we are developing, but also with others. They have a number of groups, and there's like a badge with like 17 unread messages and so on. And not everybody reads everything. It's there's a, like, if you go to the explanation of the second tick you get in a messenger, like that somebody read your message, right? You have this remark that it doesn't guarantee that really somebody read your message. It just guarantees that it was on the display, right? And it certainly doesn't guarantee that this person understood what you wanted to say. Because there's an endless way of misunderstanding each other in messaging, right?
Oh, totally, yeah. I thought like language itself is so abstract. Already. Just trying to communicate with people, and I've always said it's very dangerous to read a text message from someone and say, oh, that's what they said. Yes. Because there's already these abstractions with language, and then there's technological abstractions and connection issues.
And there's situational things.
And situational things.
People are just like briefly writing something and didn't really read something or so.
In some sense, email is actually quite good for this, because there's no it doesn't tell you anything about the presence or attention of the other person, like, and it's always like an option for them to participate. So it is kind of maybe closer to this idea of an open space. Like, I mean, you didn't need the, let's say, knowledge of the person's address or the consent or the whatever, but yeah, it's sort of flexible.
Email has this, and messengers have like a slightly different. They have like more, especially WhatsApp and so on. They have like this more online presence thing. And I mean, presence. I mean, it's hard to be present even in like a physical setting, you know. And of course, digitally, if you watch people how they use things, they briefly look on something, scroll a bit, then they go on the bike and go somewhere and so on. So this form, there is no constant presence anywhere, you know.
Right.
It's always interrupted. It's always diluted. It's always phased in more or out and so on. And I think that's something not to fight. Like, I think presence is also, especially in digital things, is a bit overrated.
Another technical thing, maybe relating to presence, you said you haven't had a SIM card since like...
I was one of the first people to have SIM cards, and I was online, I had data plans and so on. I used all the apps, you know, and basically maybe it was 2012 or 13, actually it was 2012-13, that I kind of started to say, oh, actually this whole online thing, I'm not so sure about it, you know, what it's doing with me, after like these, being online basically 20 years already, right, in 2010.
And so this is about like not wanting to be reachable, or you want to control how your attention
I want to have like be a bit more in particular situations. So my phone has Wi-Fi, and I have various places in the city where I'm going around where I have Wi-Fi. But when I leave a Wi-Fi access area, then I'm gone basically for the time being. I can still read messages that have been sent before, and I can answer some, but they will not go out until I go to the next Wi-Fi post office. You know, and actually that's quite enjoyable. I mean, you still can interact a lot. It's no problem. But it gets you away from this kind of presence illusion. Like, you know, it's like I have something to say, something to share with somebody. Maybe an audio message. I sometimes do this. I sit somewhere, maybe at the corner of the forest. Then I think, actually, that's an interesting thought. I'd like to share this with this person, and then have like a 1-2 minute audio thing or so. And it's still like I do it, I record it. It's basically sitting in the chat, and it's waiting to get synchronized.
It's essentially the same kind of interaction, but it's not immediate. And is this your intention, though, to like sort of break this idea of presence, or is there some other reason behind it? Like,
what came later, like this.
And what's hard about that? I mean, there must be some challenge, especially like today, where like smartphones are very ubiquitous. And
I think there's like
data connections.
Within my life that I experienced so far, there has been a huge kind of call to be more present in the moment, or like more presence is better. Okay, you know,
like the more the real presence.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, however we see ourselves as present, you know, being present is when you are there. Right. Wherever. Might it be on some YouTube, or, you know, whatever you're in some game. It's a bit obsessive.
Are there things you consider yourself close-minded about?
I do have a lot of closed-mindedness. Like, I'm not always open. I don't want to be. You know, it's often sometimes I feel like, no, I don't want to talk, or I don't want to. I mean, you tried last time you were here also to do this video recording. I was kind of a bit resisting and so on. It was like, you know, and it's I think it's fine to shut off and to basically say, I don't want to hear about it. Like, you know, I know that, for example, currently there's like this big, and it's a big thing actually, so it's not, it's not possible to ignore it, or so. It's like this big thing happening in the US, and the US is a very important state, you know, very powerful and so on, about the abortion rights thing. And it's like a huge throwback, like 50 years, suddenly it's 50 years earlier, a bit like with the Russian war, like suddenly, we're like back 100 years, we're like replaying some history. And that happens in many ways actually, but this, so that's, for example, I hear about this, I just talked with a friend about it, she knows quite a bit more, coming from some feminist circles. And of course, I don't want to ignore it, you know. It's just that I found myself, I want to be a bit more close-minded and limited about perceiving what's going on in the US, because the US has already kind of colonized and invaded all of our thought processes quite a bit, you know. It's like many people in the world know about things going on, like, you know, the presidents, the ministers, Supreme Court, everything about the US and so on. And then I don't know.
It's like sports, actually. People talk, you know, it's like they know the names of the players and what happened in certain games. And
yeah, it's like a show also, right? But then it's strange, because sometimes you don't even know something about the neighboring region. Like, I mean, Poland is a big country next to Germany, and you know, comparatively I know much more about the US than about Poland.
Yeah.
I know a bit more about Ukraine than about Poland. You asked about closed-mindedness, and it's basically, I don't want to put the pressure on me to always like have a stance and an opinion and some kind of participation in everything. It's like it's a way of burning out, and I think I also respect other people's choices. You know, sometimes I feel, with a bit of effort they could really help a lot, but suddenly they're very busy with other things. But I also say, okay, that's how their life is going. So yes, you know, it's a pity, but that's how it is. Like, people have different stances, and
yeah,
it's an open question how we can get on the same page and so on. I think this demand that everybody needs to hear about this topic, you know, everybody should be informed about this topic or so. It's like the model of the informed citizen that takes part in all the political processes, but quite obviously, like, there's an abundance of complexity of things ongoing, you know, around me. So I need to be close-minded. It's a form of caring, actually. You know, if I wouldn't be close-minded, I would have a hard time to care for anything. So actually, caring less about some things also means being able to care more for other things. And the kind of imperative to say you need to care for everything, you know, I mean, that's strange, right? Is it?
Also not possible. Yeah.
It's also not possible, but it's also a strange kind of, basically you are in a moral debt if you don't engage in all the important topics.
Yeah.
And it's a very strange kind of overreach demand,
Yeah.
you know.
I'm curious how you feel about spirituality. Like, what does that word mean to you?
It has meant quite a bit of things in different phases of my life, and it still does. So the spirit of happenings, there's spirits basically all around us. Basically, you could say that thoughts and what we are thinking are also kind of always a bit spiritual. They are rooted in some, you know, I mean, these words that we use when we invoke something, like we talk about the US, you know, it's almost like a spirit, like it's this, because the US is not a thing, it's like a, you know, so many of the words that we use, especially when you talk about countries and so on, is not as real or material as we treat them. Like, the US is not a thing. It's a spirit, you could say. I mean, it's like, you know, it's like on the thought or spirit level or something like this. But I'm pretty sure that's not what you were really asking for when you said, what do I connect with spirituality?
No, actually, I mean, that's kind of interesting to even see it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why I asked the question.
Yeah. But there's also the other form. I mean, this becoming aware of contexts and this kind of ecological explosion. For me, like this realization or this, that we are living in an interconnectedness of living beings and things around us. Right? It's like an explosion of complexity. Like you realize that when you look at this plant and you look deeper, then it becomes complex. If you just look at this little square meter of like the microbiological life and so on, and they tried this in biology, they kind of like, okay, maybe we cannot say what happens in this square meter. Let's look at 1 centimeter and maybe we can figure this out, right? Because it's smaller, should be easier. Right, and they kind of like went smaller and smaller, and they discovered like no matter how small they go, it always gets complex again. Like that's also kind of a notion behind this. The smaller thing is actually more like the part of something is actually more complex than the whole. If you really look into something and zoom into it, then suddenly there's like a new thing, and very, and you cannot really escape from things. You cannot really get the overview. Basically trying to state an overview. So for me, that's kind of spiritual. That it's kind of like this embeddedness that we are kind of finding ourselves in this interdependence situation. There's always this focus on autonomy. How can I be the master or something of myself?
Do you mean, is this tied to like the sort of personal development thing? Or being in control of oneself and this?
Self-improvement, self-awareness, all of these things, they kind of are practices that aim to give me agency and awareness and being, and that's a certain form of spirituality that it's very much focused on like me as a single individual separated thing. And this ecological explosion, or this kind of like realizing our interdependent enmeshing with all of the things around us, starting with the air, now with Corona, and that's realizing like everything of this is actually quite complex, like still struggling to make sense of it. And then there's, I think, the kind of a violent try to simplify and say, no, it's actually quite easy. It's only the Rothschilds, or it's some kind of Wall Street investor, and that's the root of all evil, or something like this, right? Or these are tries to actually get rid of this complexity. Suddenly, everything would be fine if we just fix this problem, right? And that's a very obviously very right-wing, like mythology that they tend to produce. But not only them. It's like you can also have it on the anti-capitalist side, where capitalism is at the root of all things. And I think this kind of trying to divide into a moral good and a moral evil, and try to say, let's just eliminate all the evil, then we only have the good things, it's kind of, I don't really enjoy this way of going about things anymore. I kind of like the internet, for example. I used to say quite some negative. I used to be very positive about it. I used to be negative about it. Then I used to be very positive about it. Then I used to be very negative about it. And now I'm basically accepting, I don't know. Like it's I can't really say in the end. There's many aspects, like the people in Tigray that are currently murdered in Ethiopia, they would probably appreciate some internet access. Who am I to say internet is evil? All these things, like if I make these general statements about things, it's like really basically, and that's for me kind of spiritual, to kind of fundamentally accept, yes, I can have some insights, I can maybe even make some changes and maybe contribute to some things happening, but I don't even want to be responsible for everything. I don't even want to claim that I have like, if everybody would be acting according to this one principle, then the world would be fine. The world, right? I think this has been ongoing for a long time, and I think it's actually one of the very problematic things that we keep repeating, that you have an idea that you fight for because you think that everybody who doesn't agree with this idea is not, shouldn't live in the end, There's this Heinz von Förster, is a cybernetician from like 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. He said, when somebody claims the truth, then the sword is not far away.
Then the what?
Then the sword, the thing too.
The sword.
The sword, right? So truth and thought. I mean, there's also this, the truth is like a sword and goes to things and so on.
Okay.
The problem is that if you claim a truth, be it about Allah, be it about one form of a god or another, or be it about science, it doesn't matter what kind of superior thing you actually predispose, then you have a problem if somebody says, no, actually I think it's bullshit, Then you will basically say, no, this person is against reality, it's against the truth. And anybody who's against the truth, in some form or another, needs to be removed, They're kind of hindering progress.
You have this reflex to sort of be anti-popular, and how does it play into this? Because you would be technically putting yourself in danger all the time, because you're always sort of pushing against like a popular idea or what people consider to be the truth, or if you're constantly diffusing these things, like how do you, why do you do this in the first place, and how do you protect yourself?
I don't know. I think I have a deep-rooted skepticism of majorities. Whenever I feel uncomfortable with majorities of anything, I don't know. I can't really explain why. Maybe it's because of school experiences, because I saw people getting mobbed, and I didn't really. I thought it's a very weird dynamic, and basically something that the person affected usually cannot really influence anymore. I feel it's kind of deep-rooted skepticism towards majorities that I have. Whenever too many people agree about something, I'm kind of maybe it's not true. Or maybe it's not something I want to engage in. Maybe I rather go somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's kind of simplified. I'm not always avoiding being part of a majority, but I'm at least asking myself. I'm skeptical. I think the power of the majority, that a 51% vote, or let it be a 70% vote, can decide anything. It's a very dangerous concept. In principle, because some things maybe should not be decidable by others at all. I mean, there's the whole thing about gender identity and lots of other things. Is it actually a majority question? I mean, not really. Maybe you know what I mean? It's this idea that you need to root everything in majorities is a strange technique, basically. We don't need to agree about everything, no. The question is, what is our practices around disagreement? Can we evade? Can I go somewhere else? Can I actually walk away? What is the penalty for that? Can I find a way of separating? I think agency has a lot to do with being able to walk away. If you are fundamentally able to walk away, then in your being somewhere, you have a certain kind of freedom ingrained, right? You have a choice. And that fundamentally alters your agency. If you don't have a choice and you feel I cannot walk away, it will destroy my life, or it will whatever. I cannot sustain myself, or I will lose the most important things in my life if I now leave. Let's say my son, or things like this. Then of course, then I don't feel free anymore. So walking away and not agreeing and so on is should always be an option. In any collective, so I have the freedom to leave without sanctions, without getting penalties if I do. I have the freedom to then also spiritually, I have a different relation then. I think also in the Corona times, a lot of people realized all this promise of the digital connecting technology remains poor in lived experience. Yes, it is nice to have a phone call. Yes, it is nice to have a video thing, but it's a different thing to hang out together. And sometimes you don't want to do it. I mean, I also know some people who enjoyed home office because then they don't need to go to the office and meet all these people. They can have more distance to it. Yeah. There's all kinds of takes on this, but I think in the end everybody is clear that this idea that everything would be mediated digitally would be like a horror movie, everybody just in their kind of prison cell at home interacting with rich interfaces, maybe even a glove where you can move things and so on. But I mean, come on. Yeah. How do you make music together? How do you touch each other? How do you dance and so on? It's no.
Yeah, how do you dance? Yeah.
Of course you can dance and make a video out of it, but it's not no. I think what many people now realize, like all this digital stuff is nice and fine, but I want to go to some festival. I want to actually, hang out in a bar with people or so.
Yeah, good options to have. Yeah.
So I think we had a learning experience regarding this digitalization thing. And that it's not the grand future that we kind of promised,
Yeah.
I hope at least. But I don't know. I think it's quite obvious.
I think we have. I mean, yeah. When you were saying that, it's. I remain optimistic about connecting digitally. I think it's nice that we can send voice messages to each other, and I've had really close friendships with people that where our relationship has been mostly virtual.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
But I realize also there is a kind of dysfunction in that, and it's not like in the real world, and we can't dance together.
Or eat.
Or eat.
Eating together digitally is hard.
How do we eat together? Yeah. Even more, yeah.
But you can do it. I mean, I've had very nice gatherings at the beginning of lockdowns with a friend, and we just had a coffee together. Each made a coffee and just sat in front of the screen, slurped some coffee, had some, But the home office paradigm kind of lends itself to work and to meet. I mean, it's called home office, right?
Your home is the office.
And maybe let me recite this history, because it is often forgotten as a kind of a, let's say, closing statement and so on. I find it's a very interesting statement. I might not get every detail right, but here's the story. I think Richard Feynman is a quantum physicist, maybe even with a Nobel Prize, whatever. He gave a series of lectures, if I remember correctly, in the 60s, about the origins of computers and the kind of processor, like in every mobile and computer, there's like this processor unit, the central processing unit, the CPU, that takes all of the input-output data and processes it and so on. And he basically explained where this comes from. And it came from, according to him in the 60s, the construction of this central processor unit by modeling an office of the 1930s and 40s, like how it was organized. An office in that time was often organized as something that has files and registers and has procedures. So there's an input-output, like there's a flow of data into this office, procedures, applications, and so on. There is an interpreter or somebody who actually looks at this, and files it in a certain category and so on, and maybe also delivers a certain document as a result. Maybe you get a certificate, maybe you get a passport, maybe you, and so on and so on. So this office handles documents and handles data and files and registers, and it takes a lot of time. It's slow. So how if we automate this? So the central processing unit is actually taking this paradigm and putting it, according to Richard Feynman in his talks, and miniaturizing it. So now we have like these little CPUs that can execute millions and billions of instructions per second according to some rules, and it can deal with input and output of data and so on. It can produce images, it can mediate videos and lots of things, but ultimately it's modeled after this office thing. And now fast forward 2020, we get Corona, and we have these devices everywhere, like at least in our scenes, but also even worldwide. There's a lot of these devices, that all have this office thing, this office computer basically that was miniaturized. And now suddenly, through these devices, all of our kind of private spaces turned into offices, home offices. There was a very dominant talk for many people who live in these like industrialized societies. It's a bit different if you live in a country that has a lot of agriculture, but in many countries you have this, and so you have a long line running from, we are kind of very fascinated with this office paradigm and the like processing, the kind of abstract rule processing and so on. It is shaping our lives now. It's like we are organizing ourselves. Many people are organizing themselves as kind of top managers. They have like a long time plan, they have like important meetings, that they go to and so on. This kind of lifestyle was usually done by top managers in the 80s, you know, but now it's like popularized, like everybody has this. It's like making video calls and conferences, and you know, it's a very funny development actually, and the role that our kind of digital automatization technology and even the very material construct of these devices and what is running in them, and how it was conceptualized, imagined 70 years ago, how it's now kind of shaping so many realities. You know, that's another example of how technology is like this bidirectional influence. Like you create some technology, but it also creates you back. You know, especially in the future. Like you create it now, and then it reverberates in the future. And yeah, I question, you know, offices, calendars, and all of these technologies, because somehow they are all under suspicion of leading to the situation that we are in, very fundamentally. Global warming, you know, the kind of conflicts that we are now entering wars for, and the deprivation of like many of biological diversity and so on. This is our way of doing it. Like we have all these offices worldwide that plan on this industrial scale and trust in procedures and rules to mediate and kind of form our social living space. And that's also, I think, maybe something to also try to get away from, to actually rebase towards a more direct, enjoyed living that is not mediated, but also use these mediations. I'm not against producing videos, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here, or audio calls, right? So that's fine as well. But maybe it's not maybe that's not the future. Maybe it's more, you know, it's a thing we can do, but how we actually shape our living spaces, if we continue to have 80% of city space reserved for cars and things like this, I think it's good to change that, to try to change that, and not just completely try to do everything digitally. Like you have a desert as a living space, but you have these wonderful paradises in the digital realm, you know? It's a bit like the Matrix movie thing, like, you know, your living situation, your physical one is like getting very bad, and then you...
Yeah. Where can people find out more about you?
I do have like a blog where, you know, there's quite a while ago, I think at the beginning of the pandemic was the last post.
Yeah. And you use social media?
And on social media, I'm not posting too much.
Yeah.
Fediverse a bit, Chaos Social, a bit Twitter, but it's on and off.
Yeah.
And I guess in some way meeting up also is a good way to get to know each other, right?
Great to chat with you, Holger. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Rosano, for hearing me babble or something.
I'm gonna monetize your babbling.
Really? Maybe it's going to be the end of your career. Who knows?
Oh no. We'll see.